Right,
Okay.
I think we're ready to begin.
Alright, so I don't know if you realized by now, but we are the ones who know the truth. So I will start with that, because the truth is pretty scary. I wanted to tell you that the truth is that we are all plugged in. That we are all plugged in into a special kind of machine. We probably didn't know it, but yes, that's the truth. And our bodies are somewhere else. And the reality that we are experiencing is really things that a computer shows us. And now I have a question for you. If I could give you... Where is the pill, Peter?
Yeah. Oh, I left it back in the hotel room.
But anyway, who would like to get a pill? And to wake up in a reality, and let's say that reality is pretty much the same, except that you are not taking this course, and that you are not have this fun of being here. But more or less, the rest is similar.
Hillary Putnam brings an event?
Yes. So, who would like to take the pill? Hands up. So we have to prepare.
Do I have the knowledge that I once took this course and I'm no longer taking it? Or am I enjoying to feel the loss? That is, that's seriously this question.
I mean, if you don't take the pill, then I will pull up another thing that you will look at and I will splash. You will forget about everything that happened. Okay, so you will forget that I told you once about the choice.
So I just want to know what happens if he does take the pill, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, if I forget, if I wake up in this alternate universe, am I aware that there are students up there in the Alps? I'm not with them.
I guess yes, because, well, so you're aware that there are. I mean, you can go online, you can find out there's this thing called the European Graduate Studies, whatever, and you know that there are people doing that. Yeah. You haven't ever been part of it. Sorry.
Okay, so
Maybe a lot richer.
would you be?
Somewhat richer.
That's a real question and real voting. Okay, I wanted really to know whether you would be ready to take the pill.
No.
Okay, so who would take the pill? Hand up.
Is it for free? It's free.
How much do you owe you? How high will it be?
So, pretty few, right?
Does that mean that the rest of you would not take it, or is the rest of you just not going to express an opinion because...
Oh, are we
Oh,
being
I
asked
wouldn't take it. No.
Wait.
you were being asked to express a view on whether you would want the pill in these circumstances?
I would not like this pill.
You would not like this pill. Okay, so how many of you are pretty clear that you would not want this pill? More than who were clear that you did want it, is that right? Seemed like it.
Good.
That's interesting.
So that's according to my...
Okay, that is according to your thoughts. Okay, you can continue now.
Alright, so you all read Nozick's example, right?
Did you? That's another question we need to know the answer to. How many of you actually have read the reading from Nozick about the experience machine?
Some of the texts were made available until pretty late in the process.
Yeah,
That's my
okay.
experience.
So you did
So
not...
I didn't.
So many of you did not anyway.
Yeah, it'd be worthwhile to go
Are the
over.
reading ones that are online available?
Right. Okay.
Alright, so maybe better, because
Yeah, just better.
what I asked you is a reaction that I thought of when reading Nozick's example. And Nozick's example...
So maybe should I just pull up and we'll actually read those paragraphs?
Oh, yes.
Why don't I do that? Sorry, just take this.
I have it down.
Oh, you have that? Yeah. Just those couple of paragraphs.
Okay. So anyway, so Nozick's example was to show that we would really not want, or that we would really not aim at something that we can call experience of pleasure and so on. So that was to be an argument against hedonism. You all know what hedonism is, right? So I will read from his work. Suppose there were an experience machine that would give you an experience you desired. Super-duper neuropsychologists could stimulate your brain so that you would think and feel you are writing a great novel or making a friend or reading an interesting book. All the time you would be floating in a tank with electrodes attached to your brain. So matrix was not first. On things, I mean, Plato was first, but then there was Nozick. Should you plug into this machine for life, pre-programming your life's desires? Of course, while in the tank, you won't know that you are there. You'll think it's all actually happening. Others can also plug in to have the experiences they want, so there's no need to stay unplugged to serve them. Ignore problems such as who will service the machines if everyone plugs in. Would you plug in? What else can matter to us other than how our lives feel from the inside? So now the question is, who would plug in if you could choose any life you want and it would be programmed into a computer? And while plugged in, you will not know that you are actually. So you would think that it was reality, as you all think now, that it is reality. So who would plug? Why? Sebastian, you said that you wouldn't plug, I mean you wanted to plug off, right?
No, I honestly, the first question with the pill is being dead, so I would probably choose that.
The pill?
Yeah, but I thought you were referring to something else. I didn't read the test and I thought you were referring to the Putnam thing, so I thought it was but I would now choose this option.
To plug in?
Yes.
And not to plug out?
Yeah.
Okay, who would definitely not plug in? Yeah, so there's somewhat more here who would definitely not plug in, it seems, although there seems to be quite a few people who, when we told you were basically in the machine, did not want to take a pill to get out of it. Is that right?
Well, we just wanted to take the class.
So the class is so important to you. Right, okay, maybe that triggers it a bit.
But vice versa, I think I would take it though, the pill to get out.
You wouldn't take the pill to get out?
Now I wanted, if it's a conscious choice, I would choose to get in, but if you re-ask me inside, I'll probably take the pill to get out.
Oh,
just out of
that's interesting, why?
Plain curiosity.
See what the other bit is like. Okay. Shall we say a little bit more about why we're asking these questions?
Yes.
So, there is a view of which, as Katarzyna rightly said, I mean, it's aimed at hedonism, but in fact it's somewhat broader than hedonism. There's a view of which hedonism is really one variety that says what really matters are mental states, experiences. If there were no consciousness in the world, suppose you had a universe with no conscious beings, no sentient beings, either humans nor sentient animals, there would be nothing of value. It would make no difference what that world was like. Of course, maybe you could say, well, eventually sentient life will evolve, so it's important that the world exists, so there's a chance of sentient life evolving. But assume that that's never going to happen, then some people would say, well, there's no value in that world one way or another. Value only comes into the world when you have beings with conscious experiences. And value, therefore, consists in their conscious experiences. And one version of that, the one that was adopted by the classical utilitarians, is that the conscious experience that really matters is pleasure or happiness. They use both terms to describe it, but basically by happiness they meant pleasure of some way or form or other. and the avoidance of misery or pain. So some other people said, well, no, there may be experiences that are worth having even if they're not pleasurable experiences. They're experiences people want to have. You might want to have the experience of climbing one of these mountains out the back, even though you know it'll be extremely tough. You're not that fit. It'll be very difficult. Often during the climb you'll think it wasn't worth it, but you want to have that experience of actually getting to the top of one of those snowy peaks, and that's what's good. But this is still what philosophers call a mental state view. It's still really that the source of value resides in having mental states of some kind, whether they're pleasurable ones, whether they're mental states of overcoming obstacles or of doing certain things. So that's a long tradition in philosophy, and Nozick is opposed to that tradition. Nozick starts from really a rights view, that we have certain rights, and builds up an ethic from that. And utilitarianism is one of the theories that he's arguing against. So he invents this thought experiment of the experience machine, which is designed to show, he thinks, that we do care about more than experiences. Okay? Because the experience machine is so designed that whatever experiences, whether you're just focused on pleasure, whether you think the only good is pleasure and the avoidance of pain, or whether you think in some way having other experiences, a variety of experiences, as the examples he gives, the experience of making a friend, or of climbing a mountain, or of reading an interesting novel. So whatever the experiences are, you can have them in the experience machine. And Nozick's assumption is that if you offer people the experience machine, they won't want to plug in. That most people will say, no thanks, I don't want to just be a body in a vat, even if I can choose to have all of the experiences that I would want to have, all of the best experiences. And even if there's no other sorts of issues, as he says, you don't have to worry about who's going to look after the machines, you don't have to worry about the fact that, if I plug into the experience machine, I won't be able to help people living in poverty in Africa, because they could all plug into the experience machine too, and so you don't have to worry about them. So he tries to take care of all of those factors. And one of the questions then is, well, firstly, is that right, that people wouldn't want to plug in the experience machine, and quite a number of you didn't want to do that, and that's a very common reaction. But one thing that's been suggested is that maybe there's something going on here in people's reactions that's called a status quo bias, that psychologists have spent a bit of time researching. That people are biased towards maintaining the status quo, maintaining the situation they're in.
Yeah, that we get used to things very easily.
And we're sort of, yeah, that's right. We
treat them as others, and then to leave them is very difficult, right? So the Nozick's argument gets to our intuitions, right? We talked about intuitions in the morning, and that's a good example whether our intuitions are right, because this very example was to show very clearly that we are not hedonists, right? And now, if we could show, as we tried with the first example, that it's not really about what Nozick talks, but about this status quo bias, is that we want to keep the life as it is, more or less. Then, of course, Nozick's argument is not very good.
I'm wondering if any follow-up experiments were conducted that brought to the attention of the subjects that perhaps they were the victim of status quo bias. But I imagine that when most subjects, if their response is characterized as perhaps a function of status quo bias, they'd be inclined to resist. So if they were to continue to insist that no, they would still choose not to forego the pleasant experiences that in some respect were authentic, knowing that there is a status bias perhaps at play. It seems like that degree of self-awareness may be enough to at least be something to take into account, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you were to just explain my reaction in terms of that sort of phenomenon. be inclined maybe dig in my heels. And I don't know if that would maybe confirm my bias or open up a space for me to resist.
Well, we can vote on it once again. I mean, of course, there must be other arguments against or pro, right? But it's clear that just on the basis of this example, it is hard to take the point against hedonism, for example, right? So this class will be about those moral aims and about values and what is the thing that we treat as good. And of course our question will be, if not hedons, so if not pleasure or happiness, then what else we can take under account. To get started, we can simply ask, what do you think the good thing is? What do you treat as good? As a name that it is rational or moral to get to. When you thought about good things in life, what were they and how did you know that they are good? In your everyday life.
Just happiness. Right?
Sorry, you said that, Ewan?
Happiness is a symptom of the thought that something is good. Okay. It's an emotion that you know, it's like a symptom or whatever you want to call it, a feeling that something you're looking, or something you're experiencing or looking at or thinking about is good. Mm-hmm. Right? Is that too simple?
Not for us.
But some people would certainly think it is, and in a way we want to discuss whether they're right. Who else? David?
I think that if I'm remembering correctly, Aristotle's line of reasoning is pretty persuasive. Whenever you ask someone, for the sake of what are you doing such and such an action? And if you keep asking that question, eventually you get to a point where you will say, I want to be happy. That's sort of a terminus to that line of inquiry, and I think that in many cases it's tough to argue with it. We take any particular thing that we do, sort of trace back our motives for doing it, and once we get to the raw fact, the basic fact of happiness, it's tough to go any further. I want to be happy. How do you explain that?
Yeah, you want to?
Yeah, so when I talk about it with my students, I usually give them this example to check whether we really want happiness or not. So imagine that you are in a relationship and you have like two choices. So you talk to your partner, there's a nice evening, you drink wine, there's music, and you have this nice conversation, and suddenly the conversation goes into this hot topic. And you may say, look, if you were not true to me, don't tell me. If I don't realize that, that means that I don't know it, I'm happy with you, don't tell me. And the person says, okay. And you have another choice. You can say, if you are not true to me, please tell me. I don't know what happens, maybe we will part or not, but I want to know the truth. The truth may not make me happy, but still I want that. So, that's again an example to work with your intuitions, but you could think of that.
One thing that makes me happy is when people I don't like fail. and that's like a serious. I wish ill on others as a way to make me happy. This is not theoretical. This is not a thought experiment. It's not even like that's subtle pleasure and
there's people he doesn't like.
No, there are people for whom I would like,
I thrive on the pain of other people.
No, not innocent, children. I'm talking about there are people who I would like to see dead.
And this is not just
I'm positing that as a form of my happiness, which might come into conflict with that of another.
So one issue is, for hedonists, is do we still think happiness is a good if it comes from what we regard as a morally bad source, right? So what you've given us might be an example of that, depending on whether, you know, these are real villains that you want to sit down for before, or whether they're just people that, you know, we don't like in some way.
It's also a matter of impartiality, yes? So we can talk about it a bit later, but
Sure.
Think of the example.
Let's go back to Katarzyna's example
Yes.
first. Yeah, let's deal with that, and then we'll come
So would you prefer the truth or stay happy? What is your intuition?
In the, maybe it's making it a bit too psychological, but in the allowing the other person to lie, giving the permission to the other person to lie, you're now in this position of not really being able to trust anything that the other person says.
You don't really know, right?
So you break your own happiness in that way.
Well, maybe, but maybe in the absence of it really staring you in the face that your partner's not being true to you, you can still be happy. You can just assume that nothing is going on, right? I mean, some people are like that. Other people would be exactly the opposite. Of course, other people would say, no, I really need to know. So one way, all right, so a different way of looking at it is whether you think somebody is really having a good life. Let's think of it, to get around that, think of it as a third-person judgment about someone else, right? So there's this couple you know, and they're like the ones Katarzyna discussed, and well, except that they never had this conversation. And let's say that the husband would be really upset if he thought that his wife was not faithful to him. But he has no reason to think that. He has no evidence of that. She's very good and very loving to him. And so he thinks that they've got a great marriage, he thinks that everything is terrific. And that goes on throughout their life, and eventually, after a good old age, he dies and says, you know, his last words were, "Thank you, my darling, for what a wonderful marriage you've given me." In fact, she's been unfaithful to him for many years, but she's been very good at hiding it. Right? So was his life worse because she was unfaithful to him or not? Did he have a worse life than if she had been faithful to him? Assume that it made no difference to his actual mental state. So again, we're back to testing in that respect.
His self-report seems to suggest that it was a fine life.
And you're not going to sort of somehow second-guess that by saying, but he was deceived and therefore he was wrong and it wasn't a fine life.
I think personally I would rather not be in that situation, but he seems to that way.
Yeah, as Michael was saying, it's different when you make a first-person judgment, of course, because then you know that this is going on. Yes, Craig?
My take on it is that that's not a good life. If you were able to live that whole life and not be able to know that, then there was certainly, I mean, that was not a good relationship. That was not a relationship where things were out on the table, where those two people felt free enough to communicate anything they wanted to communicate. Mm-hmm. You know, and my experience of what good is being in a relationship, whether it's a father-son, male-female relationship, friend relationship. It's that you can speak frankly, openly, and honestly with somebody. Now, whether or not I know whether or not someone's being unfaithful to me or not, in any of those cases, that's, anyone can be deceived, I guess. But that doesn't make it, I mean, if anything makes it good, that does not make it good. From like a third party looking in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Anybody else want to express a view on this?
I was interested by how you qualify what you just said. With my experience is, if you're making a judgment that's kind of as radical as, especially personal relationships, which is kind of interesting about the examples we're using, because I hope we're not going to generalize too much from, a relationship of love and whatever that kind of intimacy implies and all that sort of thing into like politics or business or whatever. Mm-hmm. But because for example, in that situation, I wouldn't want to judge it because it's a certain kind of relationship, and I might not want to extend that anywhere else just because of that relationship. But you, when you were talking, said my experience of that is in a sense, sort of saying that you're projecting that experience into their lives.
Well, I mean, how can I base any sort of opinion on anything except my experience?
Yeah, exactly.
My life.
So
and that's what he's asking from a third party.
Yeah.
And I am the third party looking in on it.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding is you're asking me to be subjective in this.
Well, but I am asking you in a way to make a judgment about, as you say, a third-party judgment, so that you avoid the sense that Michael raised that, well, now I don't really know what's going on or not. And let me just try and get one other thing that could be a sort of distracting factor from your example. It could be that you actually don't believe that a relationship that has deceit as a core part of it could be as good a relationship. In other words, when I told you the story that the husband thinks he's had a wonderful marriage, and actually, the experiences have been just the same as they would have been if the wife had been completely faithful to him, it might be that you don't actually believe that that's possible.
No, I don't, because I believe that all of the components of the relationship are there within the relationship, and they affect each other.
They affect it, right. So you're really saying there must be some effect coming out of it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying. So insofar as that's true, it doesn't quite serve the task that we're wanting the example to serve, which is to really get you to compare lives that are identical in terms of their experiences, their mental states, but different in terms of whether the mental state corresponds to some reality or not. That's really the kind of judgment we're going to make.
I'm just thinking about relationships that I've seen and been in that are based on deceit and quite a lot of fun. Yeah, quite a lot.
Right.
Well, so the question is it all about fun, right?
I can imagine, maybe what I was making mention of there is that the difference between experience and being able to imagine a situation in which, that's what I meant. Like, I can imagine a situation in which that could be perfectly reasonable and fun and fun.
I think in keeping with his example, if you were to go up to a 5-year-old and tell them that Santa Claus didn't exist, you'd be a real dick. But if you were to go up to a 15-year-old who believed in Santa Claus, you'd be perfectly justified in doing so. I don't know what happens between the age of 5 and 15, which makes the maintenance of an illusion no longer necessary. But to me, an ethical judgment would be the one that decides when it's okay to tell a kid that Santa Claus isn't real. Because ultimately, we all know intuitively that it's okay and almost required to let a child live under certain illusion.
Some people don't, by the way. Some people think it's right to tell children that they're Santa Claus.
So I guess I would argue with anyone who says that. But let's just assume for 2 seconds that you're not going to expose your 2-year-old to the Holocaust and let them live under certain, within a certain domain of innocence, which you know to be maintained by deceit. Yet, at a certain juncture, and it's ambiguous as to when that is, that no longer becomes a good idea.
Something to do with, I think there's something to do with, if a 15-year-old believes in Santa Claus, they're going to be open to all sorts of beliefs that, it's going to basically affect the way they relate to the world and the way they live as an adult, so that they better realise that sometimes people say things that aren't true.
I mean, my best friends went to I went to a prep school, and my best friends, who in high school, they went to this neighboring school, which was a Waldorf school. And they weren't taught math until 8th grade, and they believed in Norse mythology until they were 6th graders, and it made them really fun to play with on the playground. But the kids from the prep school were seriously, you really buy this stuff? They're all the best bankers now. And so it's there was obviously a pedagogical decision that school made, which said, no, it's actually okay to prolong it. And I'm not trying to decide where it's okay. I just think that's maybe the decision that, to me, that's the realm of ethical decision making. It's there are certain illusions which are soluble and others which are not. Even if the people who are under them are completely innocent of their being deceived.
There's also one thing to try to tie that up with these thought experiments we did before. interesting is the fundamental question: how does one relate to reality as in capital R, or truth with capital T? Is it something out there which we can connect to, or is it something completely outside of us? Hence, I don't know, if I would probably ask that person, like, do you think truth is attainable, you should connect to reality? If he says yes, then I tell him, yeah, okay, your wife has been cheating with you all along. If he say like, no, truth has always been inside my head, so just let him be. I don't know, if that is
you bring in the standard of the own person's
because this entire obsession with I want to know the truth it says something about how you want to live your life vis-a-vis
It's a projection.
or reality.
So it may be, you're saying, if you understand them to be someone who loves truth, it may be in the interest of their happiness to tell them a uncomfortable truth.
But if he thinks anyways that it's all subjective, then let him be.
Well, maybe that gets back to... sorry, what's your name again?
Jamie, sorry.
Jamie, yes. So that gets back to Jamie's point about maybe some things are right in relationships but not in politics, right? I mean, it was one of the problems, I think, with the Bush administration, that they were not really into that reality-based view that one of their spokesmen once put it, right? So, you know, if believing that there's anthropogenic climate change really messes up your politics and, you know, loses a lot of the campaign finance donations that you would get from certain interests, well, we don't have to go there because my truth is in my head, and so, you know, let's keep on burning fossil fuels at whatever rate we like. But you don't really want politicians to adopt that perspective, I think.
But then the people who elected them want that. So if you would be a hardcore Democrat, you would say, okay, that's what the majority wants. Let's celebrate the destruction of nature.
This is the hardcore Democrat with a small d you're talking about here. Yeah, well, we will get onto climate change later. But I mean, I suppose I was saying that to think, well, you can't really apply this idea that truth is just whatever is in your head. Nobody's really prepared to apply that across the board.
Yeah, but maybe in instances, maybe in truths.
Yes, you could do it within a relationship, as in the example that Katarzyna gave you. A couple could do that.
I also think that's the problem with thought experiments of that nature, that you're attempting always to be consistent with your thinking, because you know the next question is going to be, well, what if? I don't know if that's necessarily always. Consistency is not a human trait, I think.
Yeah, probably philosophers think that it's a good way to exercise your consistency, yes? I mean, so you maybe will arrive at something that that you will be able to keep to, right? I mean, there are many other problems with hedonism, and we can talk about it. But because Sebastian talked about the truth, and that you can choose what you want, so I thought that we may pose this question now: if not happiness, then what? And if the goodness depends on the things that you want. So if you want the truth, that's fine. If you want the happiness, that's fine. If you want, well, something else, then it's okay.
Well, I mean, are all of these things transient? I mean, if I go to see a tragic play, I don't want to be happy during the tragic play. I mean, I want to experience that tragedy. If I'm in a pleasurable, happy situation, then yes, I do want to be happy. But I mean, there isn't one size fits all for everything. I just want to be happy all the time. That would seem like madness to me.
You certainly don't want to be in a cheerful mood all the time. But on some views of hedonism, there are certain states that you might want to have that you value as mental states, and they're part of your happiness, although they're not being cheerful. So Sidgwick's definition of pleasure is not actually being cheerful, but it's being in mental states that you regard as desirable for their own sake, so intrinsically desirable. So it could be that the feeling you have when you go to a tragedy, watch a tragedy or something like that, is a mental state that you want to have. Maybe you don't want to have it all the time either, but it's a mental state that you want to have sometimes. So in that sense, in this broader sense of the term, it could be seen as forming a part of your happiness.
Yeah, well, I guess I was sort of thinking about the original question is what the good things in life, what are the good things in life? And
so having the full range of human emotions might be part of your view of what's the good things of life.
Yeah, and experiences as well.
Experiences.
But I think that maybe a way of thinking about that as well is there's a difference between going to the theater and witnessing a tragedy and enjoying it precisely because it is real, because it isn't really happening. And I think that would drastically change the content of your reaction, right? You couldn't be happy actually going through a tragedy of your own. But going to the theater, recognizing that this is sort of a fictional work, you can take pleasure in it, even though it sounds a little funny to say we're feeling happy as we're watching the Hamlet or whatever.
Well, really, I mean, to sort of riff on that, I do deeply want to be embedded in that tragedy. I want to feel it. If I want it to like wring me dry, then in a sense that's, I mean, I could say that's the pleasure of it. You know, I don't want to go to a tragedy and be man on the outside of it and watch it.
Yeah.
I want it to get me.
But on the other hand, you walk out of the play, go home, the phone rings. Oh, turns out your father is now dead. And guess what? Your aunt's going to marry your uncle. You probably wouldn't take as much pleasure.
No.
No.
Yeah.
So let's just follow up by what Katarzyna said of this other view about sort of value being related to wants and desires. We talked a little bit in the first session about some desires that people have, and I said a little bit about how in the development of economics, economists moved away at the beginning of the 20th century from the classical utilitarian view that utility consists in pleasure and the avoidance of pain, to the view that it consists in satisfaction of desires, avoiding the thwarting of desires, and based, as I said, on the idea that you can get at desires through how people behave, through their revealed preferences. So this is something that it's actually a view of what's good or bad that goes back quite a long way. You can find it in Thomas Hobbes. He defines good as essentially getting what you desire. But it wasn't really taken up, wasn't really terribly popular until the 20th century. And then it started to become quite a popular form of utilitarianism. So, whereas utilitarians had generally, in the 19th century, been trying to maximise pleasure and pain understood as mental states, in the 20th century, a lot of them became what's sometimes called preference utilitarians. That is, that they wanted to maximise the satisfaction of desires, of what people wanted, and avoid the thwarting of desires. And one reason, I mean, there are a number of reasons why this happened. I've already indicated one was partly associated with economics and its desire to get to things that you could in some way observe. But there was also the view, I think, that it was more respectful of people's wishes, that there was something paternalistic about the old view, which basically said happiness or pleasure is what is good for you, whether you want it or not. And other people might have said, that's not what I want. So, for instance, here's a possible example. Somebody could be gifted at writing, putting words together in various ways. And they might be thinking about becoming a poet. They have a certain talent for poetry. But they know that poets really struggle to make a living. There's no market for poetry out there. So if you dedicate yourself to becoming a poet, you're going to have a pretty hard life. Maybe, yeah, you will produce some fine poetry in the end, but your life's going to be tough and lacking in a lot of things that you would enjoy. On the other hand, given that you've got this gift for words, you'd be great at writing advertising jingles. And you can make a lot of money. You know, there's a lot of money in writing advertising jingles. If you can really do the good ones that catch on, you'll have a really comfortable life, all of those things. You'll be able to travel, to buy a holiday house in by some great beach with a lovely view. You know, other people will be attracted to you because they like that lifestyle too. So you'll have lots of friends, partners, whatever else it is. And you know, every now and again you might have this little pang about, oh, I could have been writing great poetry, but you know, you'll get over that. So you could imagine telling this to your friend, who's a talented writer, and saying, look, when you think about this, you really ought to go into advertising. You're just going to have a much happier life. But he says to you, it's not what I want to do. I want to write poetry. I accept it. I accept everything that you said, right? I accept the facts of the example again. I accept that I am going to have a happier life if I go into advertising. And it's not that I'm saying I'll be tormented by the guilt all the time so I won't be able to enjoy the things that money buys. I will be able to enjoy them. I'll forget about my ambition to be a poet after a while. I will enjoy more. But it's not what I want. So then the question is, so what is really the good for this person? And the hedonist has to say, if we accept the facts, if we accept the story as told, and of course we have to put aside any side effects like whether he would somehow make other people happier by writing the great poetry or whatever. But the good for this person would be to go into advertising. And I guess a lot of people felt uncomfortable about that. They said, well, he's thought about it. He knows the facts. He's chosen. He's telling you that he's choosing to have a less happy life because he really wants to be a poet. So what business do you have to tell him that he's made the wrong choice? So what's your response to that story? Do you think that the good for him is to become a poet?
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Everybody thinks that? Michael, did you want to
I you brought up Daniel Kahneman before.
Sorry?
You brought up Daniel Kahneman before?
I did, yes.
Yeah. And I badly paraphrased, but he would say we wouldn't look back on our whole life as one big slab and say it was happy. We kind of divide it up into peaks. We remember sections, right?
Yes.
And this poet, being a poet, be anticipating that he would see these peaks.
So he might remember. So that's actually a different question that raises. And so what you're saying is he might be quite satisfied with his life because even though he'd been miserable for large stretches of his life, he'd had these occasional peaks when he managed to get a poem into some small literary magazine read by 300 people, and that gave him a really big kick, and that's what he remembers. So you're saying, well, maybe he'll be satisfied with his life. Of course, the other guy might be quite satisfied with his life too. Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. Then we would really have to. We could also ask whether we should judge lives by their remembered experiences or by the stretch of their experiences. Maybe I'll ask you that in a minute, but first I want to get some more reactions to this. Yes, hi?
I have an issue with the thought experiment itself, and that is I think that there's a bias, that we have a bias, that we value more highly the vocation of being a poet over being in advertising. Therefore, we have more of a tendency to say, well, yeah, of course he should choose this path. So what if we switched it around and said, no, he really wants to be in advertising, then what?
And you have to make it that he would be happier as a poet too, or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, that is an interesting point, that the example is a bit loaded. I agree. Let's just go around the room and get some more comments, and maybe come back to some of these.
I agree with you, Victoria, that I would be happier being a poet, I think, but I wouldn't, I would say to him, I wish you chose to be a poet instead of an advertising thing, but I couldn't claim that, I don't think I could claim that it was wrong of him to decide to do advertising.
So either way, he wouldn't be wrong, though.
Right, it's like there's a sense in which I want to respect his ability to choose, even though I might not think he chooses what's the best for him.
And it seems to me that kind of what's wrong. I'm the dull clod in this situation for asking myself that question. Because it seems to me that, like, rather than like this individual's happiness, kind of my task here is to maximize the differences, you know, in such a way that there's this kind of culinary there's this term harmony in Chinese, it's he, and it refers to, in the presence of these disparate ingredients, these different ingredients, what results from their combination isn't simply 3 flavors together. Say it's 3 ingredients, but now you have this 4th thing that's become possible, and without those 3 things, that 4th thing is never possible. And it seems to me like, well, if I can't appreciate that, then, you know, the guy's gonna, you know, do just fine without me, because I'm having to struggle to figure out why I can't maximize his choice. Does that follow?
I'm struggling a little to understand what you're getting at there, I guess.
It just seems to me that, like, so I know that he would enjoy being a poet. Yeah.
He would enjoy it, but not as much as he would enjoy being advertising. It's taken over his whole lifespan, right? He wants to be a poet, but we know that he's going to have lots of long stretches where he's cold and hungry and worried about how he's going to get enough to live.
Think of Gauguin. I mean, Gauguin is a great example.
Like being an advertiser, the most dreadful thing, then it may turn out to be just total hell. I mean, which I would think it would be, you know?
And what about those points of hardship and suffering? He writes the best poetry of his life.
Yes, he might.
What about Gauguin?
I thought of Gauguin. I don't know if you know the story. Yes, but Gauguin was making a lot of money. He was in a trade business, money business, whatever. He had family and children, and it was really worth off. And then he met one of the painters, sorry, I don't remember whom, and he decided to be a painter. And he lost everything, including family and wife, and he still wanted to be a painter. Right? And then he traveled and so on, and only after that he was famous. But for the sake of being a painter, he lost everything that he was happy about. Because one thing that we have to think now is that this person was really not happy. Okay, so it's not that he's really happier writing poetry. No, he's really miserable. So let's stick to that. Yes, but still he chose something different, something that made him really unhappy, but he still wanted that. Because if we move everything to happiness, then of course we will end up that his choice simply indicated that he would be happy this way.
This was my failure in talking, was that rather than being guided by the question, well, what's going to make him happy? Like, the happy is, I think, just a really terrible value to adhere to when structuring a life. You know, like, it seems really insufficient or anemic. The life that you would lead would be brittle and rather than happy, when I'm talking about this culinary example, the value here instead of happy is harmony, but in this culinary sense. And so then, but it's this. I'm abusing the thought experiment itself. So right. Maybe not a good contribution to the discussion.
Why? I don't understand why, on all these examples, that being happy is like the most important thing. If he's doing what he wants to do with his life, and he's miserable, then why isn't that preferable?
That's the question.
That's the question. That's fine if you think so.
Yeah, I do.
Then there's another theory. Yes, that's the preferentism or desire theory.
Right. I just don't understand why, like.
So.
And also, I think it is really important how we define happiness, because it seems like in this example as well that it's like, oh, I have money and a nice house and a family, so I'm happy. But I'm also, waking up every day and doing something I don't want to do with my life and wasting my life. So I don't really know if that's happy at all.
So in a way, your point is a bit like Heidi's, that we're biased against this kind of life. Maybe you just said he's wasting his life. Of course, some people would think he's not wasting his life. He's enjoying his life greatly.
Well, I mean,
and advertising gives him the means to do it. I'm not saying he doesn't hate doing it,
Right, but I thought that the example was that we knew that he did not want to do that. That he would be that he would more enjoy being a poet than being an advertiser.
No, we didn't think that he would more enjoy it. We're saying right now he wants to do it, but that doesn't mean that he will enjoy doing it more. I mean, you can want things, and this is in a way why the two theories are apart. If they went there, you can want things for some reason other than you will enjoy doing them.
Like the truth in the example of the untrue part.
Right. The partner who says, I want the truth even though I know it may destroy my relationship, which is a very central part of my happiness.
Okay.
So one argument for becoming a poet, even if that means being miserable and not having money, could be that appeal of being or feeling unique. So I think there can be great satisfaction derived from this feeling that you do what only you can do, and probably, well, yeah.
Yeah. So, but then again, you're talking about having great satisfaction from it, and desires doesn't. That sounds like you're going back to a view of your experience, if you have this experience of great satisfaction from it. So let me give you a crazier kind of desire as a way of testing whether you really think that if this is what somebody wants, then that's fine. So there's an example that comes out of John Rawls, who's probably the most famous 20th century American social political philosopher, who imagines somebody who, what he really wants to do is to count the number of blades of grass in various lawns. Right? So you imagine a little row of suburban houses and they have various lawns, and what this person most wants to do is to spend his life finding out how many blades of grass there are in each of these lawns. That's what he wants to do, not necessarily what's going to make him happy, but that's his overriding desire. So if he's able to fulfill this desire, if he is actually able to spend a lot of time counting blades of grass and able to establish that there's however many blades of grass there is in a number of these lawns, is that a good life for him? Is that the best life that he could have had? His overriding desire? He was able to fulfill this overriding desire? It didn't make him happy particularly in the sense of improving his mental states, but that's what he wanted to do. Or should we have somehow tried to get him out of that desire and get him to do something else?
Well, it seems like this idea of wanting to get him to do something else is to sort of, want him to be part of the worker force. You want to give him something to do, something that sounds. I mean, it sort of infers to give him something constructive as opposed to. You make it sound like this idea might not be might not lead to anything. It may be something that doesn't contribute to the common good or to the state or whatever. That it's not a contribution, but it's kind of hard, I think, to make a judgment on something like that when you don't know the end or the sequential result of this, because we don't know. We don't know about the poet and what the poet's going to do. We don't know what may come of him counting blades of grass.
83 billion, whatever it is, blades of grass in these lawns?
I mean, who are we to make these value judgments over this other person's life? I don't understand why it's our responsibility to try to shape and coordinate someone else's experience in the world.
Well, I mean, I didn't say it's our responsibility, but I think, if you like, it's our responsibility to try and figure out what we think is of ultimate value. That's what we're trying to do in this session. And these are examples to help us try to clarify our thoughts about these questions.
Right, but I don't understand why. I don't want to count all the blades of grass out there. But if someone does, I don't understand why why I should think that they shouldn't be doing that, or why we should think that the person in this example shouldn't be counting these blades of grass. I mean, I don't want to, but why can't they?
I'm not necessarily saying that we ought to forcibly drag them away from it. That's a different question. But suppose that there's a good movie on down in town. You know, I'm trying to get away from your idea that I'm somehow a representative of the capitalist class wanting to get him into the workforce. Suppose that there's a nice comedy that I'm sure he'll like. I know him. So if he goes down there, he'll spend 3 hours. He'll count fewer blades of grass. But he'll really be sitting there and he'll, have some good belly laughs and he'll come out feeling good and much more cheerful than he will if he continues to count blades of grass for the afternoon. So should I suggest to him that there is this comedy and somehow try and lure him away from counting blades of grass, which is still what he most wants to do, but should I sort of try and say, come down with me, I'd like your company and all that, which is not necessarily true, I enjoy it by myself. But I'm just, trying to give him 3 hours of fun. Would that be a good thing to do or not a good thing to do for him?
Well, I mean, you can suggest that there's the movie there, but I don't think you should try to lure him away, especially by lying to him. I don't think that that's probably a good way to interact with someone. But I also, if he wants to count the blades of grass, I don't understand why you would want to distract him from his overall goal.
Okay, so one answer, the hedonist answer would be, I'm trying to give him a better life. He's not having a good life. He is fulfilling his overriding desire, but he's not having a good life because he's not having any fun, not enjoying things, and I'm trying to give him a better life. That's the hedonist answer. Now, whereas the preference utilitarian, I guess, takes a different view. It says he's having the best possible life he could have. He's got this one overriding preference, and he's able to act on it and fulfill it. So he's having the best life he could have. And in a way, I suppose I'm using the examples to appeal to your intuitions to see where you sit in that choice between the classical or hedonistic utilitarians and the preference utilitarians.
Of course, there will be a question about usefulness of the person impartially, right? So for the society, in other words, because of course we are not only ourselves, but we're in a company, we're in a society, in the world, and maybe his skills could be used otherwise. But let's say that let's put it aside for a while. But isn't it common that if you know that someone has really great skills, he plays piano, or he could write great poetry, or he could be a journalist or whatever, and then you know that he or she spends her time lying in bed, laziness, watching television or whatever, doing nothing, right? Nothing beside that. Don't we think that there was something wrong, that the life could have been better for the person?
It's tempting to suggest that we are projecting our will, what we would see ourselves rather doing when we look at somebody that's perhaps lazy. I mean, I teach art, and it is a very common conversation at many stages of a student's career or whatever as a student. And I come across students who are incredibly talented, and they could have all the chops to be a good artist. But I make it clear to them that it's not just about having the so-called talent. It's also the will to want to live, to make your life in the form of an artist, which means that you have to work within the so-called art world or whatever. And I also make it clear to other students who perhaps are more commercially minded that that's fine as well. And I'm not making this up as some kind of liberal position. I think it's actually to do with the individual's will as to which direction they wish to take, whether it's the romantic poet who starves, or whether it's the fat advertising man who makes all the money. At that stage of their lives, there's always a lot of talent and ability, but they have to decide or think about what their will and drive is towards what they want to do. And that's as far as my intervention would ever want to go.
Okay, so I have now this question. Let's say that this extremely talented person is terribly lazy, and he gets into a situation when he's dependent on others. And for example, society has to give him support because he's so poor that he could not cope himself. But we still think that it was good of him to get lazy, just to be lazy, not to do anything, because that's what he wanted.
Good for him?
For him, yes.
Good life for him.
I don't think so.
I mean, I think I recognize like both things. There's an extent to which you don't really want to force somebody to do something. But like I think even in my own life, like I probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for a couple of professors that said, "Hey, I think you should go to this." And I mean, right now I'm a lot happier that they did. And at the time I didn't really. I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. But I'm kind of glad. Like I think a lot of what it means to be human and live in relationship with each other is to sometimes push each other a little more than we want to, and like at the time it's really uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's what you do with children, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You do not allow children to do whatever they want.
Right. So, I don't know. You might say it's learning a tact or a balance of what's proper in terms of using your influence or authority, but
what's really operating here, though, is that we're going to meet reciprocity, right? Like, there's going to have to be reciprocity in that relationship. One day I'm going to be the parent of my parents, just as I was the child of them, right? Like, there's going to have to be a handoff. And so in the case of this lazy person, it just doesn't seem like, well, where's the reciprocity here, it doesn't seem adequate, to live this way.
But as Peter asked, is it adequate for the society or for this person?
I think both of us, both entities are failed in this situation. This person and society, both of us have reached, we've got a bit of a conundrum on our hands. Like, well, what is it, how is it that we're not finding a way to reciprocate with one another?
So does it mean that they had a right to tell this person who comes, blades of grass, that he's not doing the right thing? That's, even if he desires, that's not what justifies his action.
But it's a question of how much energy you spend trying to get him to change his ways. Like, it's probably not worth it to tell him every single day and spend hours trying to change his mind.
But it's worth putting a little bit of energy into it.
At some point, you just have to write him off.
That may be, but that still suggests that you would have a better life if you were not following this course.
Right.
Josh, what do I think of you?
I think that sometimes that intrusion into the lazy man's life is given without another option for that person. Stop counting blades of grass. Okay, what's my alternative? And there is no clear alternative to counting grass.
Go to
the movie, that's right. You'll have more fun at least, don't worry. I'll pay for the ticket if you like. David, were you pointing to?
I was just going to ask if one useful way of thinking about it would be when we make the decision to intervene, we're not so much intervening on behalf of that person in the present, but on behalf of their future self, which we may be able to have a better sense of than they do. I mean, I guess it ties into some ways the example of parenting and the encouraging professor who shows us options we might pursue that don't seem terribly appealing to us now, because they're regarding us, they're thinking of the future self rather than the present self. I'm not sure that's useful.
And it also ties in with what we talked about this morning about whether it's irrational not to have concern for your own future, as in the various examples, the smoker example and so on. Well, there's a couple of other places we could go, but yeah.
That intervention is coming from, I don't know where that intervention is coming from. From what moral high ground do we then come to this person? Where are we pulling our sense of what is productive, what is right?
Well, yeah. So I guess some of us may have a sense of what is a good life, which is what we're trying to discuss. And we may think that people can make mistakes about that. Make mistakes about what's a good life for themselves. And we want to at least draw their attention to the possibility that they're making a mistake. As I said, how far we are justified in going in order to get them away from the life that we see as mistaken is a separate question. And it might be that we are rather opposed to paternalism, and so we would not justify using coercion or something like that, but we might want to think that at least trying to talk to him and get him to see that he's made a mistake is something that's worth doing.
We may think, for example, that the person doesn't have full information, right? And that's why there is this theory, desire theory, full information account, which means that the goodness is only based, the goodness is if you have all the information that you need, and only then you make the choice. Right? So this is the rational choice, or the good choice, only if you have the full information. But of course, now the question is, what does it mean to have full information? So we can't have full information. That's an ideal.
But there's also an extreme unhappiness that is possible in the presentation of the full information. If you come to the person counting grass, and this gets to what I was saying before, and I see it happen today often, especially in education, where you come with an idea or a promise of an alternative option rather than counting grass. Mm-hmm. But that option is not found in reality. It's a relic from the past that maybe our parents experienced.
You mean because there was a period when it was easy to get jobs in something or other else that you could do with your life, and those career options are not open anymore? That's the sort of thing you're thinking of?
Yeah, it's almost a torturous state to be presented with a myriad of options, but then you're limited by certain things in the society to only a few of those options. Right.
So that's actually what happens in Poland now, because we have this idea that if you're educated, you will have a job, like for sure. Right? And now, because the system, there are various things to that, but the system is very open, a lot of people get to high schools and so on, and to the universities. And of course now, it changed so much that even if you graduate, then you may not have a job at all. And then you ask this question of why I spent all those years studying those things, and I have nothing. So,
that's
this is true.
I find we a bit going in circles, and I find this particular example a little banal. It's hard to sharpen ourselves on it, and it seems to be, if I get it right, a question of paternal intervention. And there's a pedestrian reader of medical ethics, and there's a case, the Gillick case, where the Jehovah's Witness, as a child comes in, who would get away the child being, yes, but the Jehovah's Witness comes in and is bleeding to death, and he, if he gets a drug, he needs a blood transfusion, and if he gets it, he won't be able to go back to his community ostracized. And the doctor is in most countries expected to take the choice of life away from the child and give the blood infusion. And that's that kind of paternal. I just thought we could talk it on a really life and death level, where there is this paternal intervention.
Right, and that actually is an interesting example in relation to what Katarzyna was saying about how you understand full information. It's slightly complicated because, as you said, the Gillick case relates to, and the parents are really the ones refusing permission for blood transfusion there, right? And the child's as a result of that case, the law was, changed or clarified to take away from parents the right to deny their child a life-saving blood transfusion. So the view was that parents in this situation do not have the authority to deny a blood transfusion, but I think they still have the authority to refuse it for themselves if they're adults.
Yeah, and the child's considered incapable of giving the decision at that stage.
Right. So that somewhat complicates it. But let's look, and the other question is also, as you mentioned, will the child not be able to go back to the community? And I think actually Jehovah's Witnesses communities differ on that somewhat.
That's now more subtle, I guess.
Yes.
At the stage.
And especially, I've heard from, I looked at this because I was working in a bioethics centre, some Jehovah's Witnesses actually said, well, we're quite happy with this law. And we said, well, you're happy with this law? How's that? And he said, yes, because it means that we don't ever have to make the decision for our child to permit the blood transfusion. But our child still lives. So there's no sin from their perspective. But there's also no loss of child. So that's an ideal situation. But, sorry, Mickey, are you just on this point, or do you want to...
I was just going to ask about like the general... It seems like we are kind of taking all these examples that are very different situations, and as if though we're starting looking for some kind of universal rule, like we're taking this extreme example now. I want to ask you, do you believe that there will be such a thing as a universal ethical rule, or is ethics situational?
I think that's a false dichotomy. So I would say yes to both of those. And the reason I would say yes to both of those is, and I think Katarzyna would agree, because we're utilitarians, which is to say we think that the right thing to do is what will have the best consequences. So it's going to depend on the actual situation. So that's the universal rule, right? The universal rule is you should always do what is going to have the best consequences. Overall, yeah, that's right. And in fact, this discussion is trying to figure out what do we mean by best consequences. Do we mean makes people happiest, or do we mean gives people more of what they want, satisfies their desires, or there's various other possibilities. But the universal rule is that you should always do what will have best consequences. But of course, in different situations, different forms of action will have best consequences. So, I mean, when the term situation ethics was actually coined, it was in opposition to people who believed that there were some things that you ought never to do no matter what the consequences. So it was actually, it was a term that developed in Christian ethics as a response to people who said it's always wrong to tell a lie, for example, to intentionally tell a lie, or of course it's always wrong to kill an innocent person, or something of that sort. And the situation ethicist said, well, no, because sometimes telling a lie might be the only way to save a life, or sometimes killing an innocent person might be the only way to stop 1 million innocent people being killed. And then the situation will mean that these things are right. And in a way, the consequentialist said, well, we knew that all along. We don't need this newfangled term as it then was, situation ethics. That's just what we've been saying all the time. But it's not in opposition to universal rules as such. It's in opposition to universal rules that are not based on the consequences of what you're doing. Sorry, but I still wanted to come back to Michael's point about the Jehovah's Witness. Yeah, because the point was full information, right? Now, so this idea that the desire theory was really about the desires you have when you're fully informed developed in terms of obvious objections to desire theory. People say, the economists said, well, people should have whatever they desire, and then somebody gets back to advertising, somebody makes them desire something, thinks that this is going to be fantastic, that if only they have this, their life will be wonderful, and they buy it, and of course it doesn't really change their life at all. So was it actually a good thing that they should, get this? And then you could say no, because they were not fully informed, they were under a misapprehension about what difference it would make to their lives. So the desires we should satisfy are the desires that they would have if they were fully informed. And that seems perfectly reasonable until you get to some of these sorts of cases. So now let's say that Jehovah's Witnesses believe that if you consent to having a blood transfusion, you will burn in hell forever. So what does the full information theorist do to that? Does that desire count or not? Let's assume that hell, there is no such place called hell. Or if you want to be more modest, let's just assume that accepting a blood transfusion doesn't mean that you go to hell. So do we say, well, the Jehovah's Witness desire doesn't count because it's not fully informed, because they're under the misapprehension that if you consent to a blood transfusion, you'll burn in hell forever? So in a way that then becomes equally, some people might say, well, if you take that into it, it becomes equally paternalistic. You know, you're telling these Jehovah's Witnesses that there is no hell, and therefore you're coercing them into consenting to blood transfusion.
Especially if they think for the rest of their lives that they will burn in hell, right? I mean, that's the situation. You decide to do something to them because you know the information, but they don't accept it. That's another problem. That you may be aware of something that people do not want to accept. That is another problem for those theories, I believe.
Isn't this full information, for example, with hell, regardless of the entire religious debate, but it ends up being a consensus. It's just something we cannot fully know. There's no way to disprove the existence of hell, so it ends up being a societal consensus. Most people believe hell doesn't exist, or blood transfusion wouldn't get you into hell. Therefore, I don't know, you're not in full possession of the information, you're just representing a consensus.
That would be one way of looking at it, I guess.
Yes, and I think you can invent a situation in which you do have the knowledge that the person does not accept. I cannot think of an example right now, but let's say that somebody believes that a red color will make all the people hate her, right? And you know that it is not true. And you do something, inventing something, right? But anyway, that you have a knowledge that the person doesn't have, and you still do that. A drug is a red color. I believe that every time I swallow something red, then it will make me so ugly that no one loves me.
So you're saying there are some cases where there's a kind of you clearly have the evidence and it's not just a social consensus.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there could be cases maybe where it doesn't even matter if they accept it, if you know it. Sort of like, one time I met a guy who, his son had become a part of this cult, where they believed that like this Chinese guy was like the return of Christ or something. And they moved into this warehouse and all lived together and cut off all contact with everyone else. And in an attempt to get his son out, he called him and told him his mother died, like falsely. But the son said, "Oh, too bad," and then just kind of hung up. And so he hired like private investigators and they tracked him down, and then like they kidnapped him and like tied him to a chair in a warehouse, and they had to hold him there for like a couple days. And the father had to just like sit there and like keep telling him, "Look, this is who you are. Like you are not who you've kind of like there's situations in which, or I mean, a less extreme example could be a relationship that like let's say you date somebody and your family says this really isn't going well for you. Like they see kind of what you become, but you're in it and you can't really see."
Yeah, I think they're all good examples. I think actually the cult one, the sort of indoctrination sense, is a good one, because if we're talking about the desires that people have, to what extent do we want to somehow make them authentic desires, the desires they really have, and to what extent it shows it's not just a matter of having a couple of false beliefs, but to what extent are they actually indoctrinated in some view, and therefore we should not give weight to their desires. And it's an interesting example, and it goes back to, I mean, Josh, you were expressing the view that there was something wrong with us to try and get the grass counter out of that sort of life. Right? So what do you think about Jake's example? Was the father wrong to kidnap the son and try to break the indoctrination? Maybe that's a loaded term you think that I'm using, but what we might see as the indoctrination of the cult in living this way and believing this?
Well, I don't know. I think I think kind of a correlation between that is like the notion of mental illness. To say that what this person is doing is something abnormal, and so the relationship between the father and the son is a type of pathology, right? To say that being involved in this cult is something that is bad for you, is something that is harmful to your health, and it's kind of like that notion of when you can commit someone, if they're a danger to themselves or others, kind of a thing. And I think about this in the same way that if we think about like mental stability in the same way as like the son in the cult, then it becomes an issue of the father has no idea of like the true subjecthood of the son and doesn't understand the way that the son relates to other people in this group and relates to himself. But as an external actor acting upon his son, he sees it as something that's bad for him. Now, I don't know the difference between this son being in the cult and, I don't know, people believing in religion. I don't know, like, fundamentally, I don't know what the difference between these two is because I don't know the details of this cult and I don't know the details of what actions they do. But if we're going to act upon someone just because we disagree with their beliefs or we think that their participation in a group is unhealthy, then, I don't know the difference between the father intervening in his son and, our demonization of Islam, for instance.
Okay. I mean, that could go both ways, right? I mean, you said demonization, which is just, but I mean, it could be saying, well, the father ought to leave the son in the cult and there's no business doing it, or it could be saying the father would be justified in trying to do the same if his son had converted to Islam.
Oh, I mean, my position is that he should leave him alone. That's...
So you think that there are no crazy desires that we should somehow make people don't have them?
Well, I mean, I also kind of have an issue with crazy, but I think that there are destructive desires, if you will. I don't think it's quite as easy to place desires along like a kind of grid in which we can, draw a pro and con list, and there are good desires on one side and bad desires on the other side. And I think that we all desire multiple things at the same time that often conflict with one another. So coupled with that, with a crazy desire would be a very productive desire. And the way that, those desires are manifested in life, could be bad in some instances and good in other instances. So I think it's very difficult to make a normative judgment on someone having crazy desires.
Okay, I think actually that is a very good point to introduce the impartial perspective. To introduce the other. I think that we'll do it after.
Okay. To me, I think the thing to do is, if we take your example and flip it around. Okay, let's say the father's in a cult and his son's trying to get out. So he hires private investigators to kidnap him and indoctrinate him back into the cult, if we flip that around. So, to me, it seems like it's okay to offer suggestions for different lines of thought, but when it comes to kidnapping, I think that's where I think I would draw the line. So it's okay to offer suggestions, offer your line of rationality, but I think that's really as far as you can take it.
Although,
I'm thinking about one example of kidnapping. What was that? Nazi kidnapped.
Eichmann?
Exactly. Okay. We can talk
but
about
that's different though. That's to get justice for others, for his victims, right?
Yeah, that's
true. But this is a case of kidnapping for his own benefit. In a way, I guess the father would have said, this is simply trying to release him from people who already kidnapped him. And they may not have physically kidnapped him, but they may have used various kinds of psychological techniques when he was vulnerable to get him to believe certain ideas. And we do have evidence that can happen, and that it's very hard for somebody to think independently in certain circumstances, that they place their trust and confidence in certain people who can then exploit them. So I mean, I'm not sure that, I would object to, obviously normally you object to kidnapping, although an example might be a case again where you don't for a different reason. But I would have thought, you could say, look, it's reasonable for the father to say, I have to have a way to spend a week with my son trying to get him to see that where he's going is wrong. If at the end of a certain period, whether it's a week or whatever, I can't change him, then I'll assume that in some sense this is what he authentically, independently believes and let him go his way. That would seem to me to be a sort of a compromise between, on the one hand, just saying, well, he has to believe what I believe no matter what, and on the other hand saying, look, he's a free agent at all times and therefore I can't lay physical hands on him. Yeah, Jay?
I think, one way to look at it might be to, place, I think we kind of make the dichotomy between, this coercion, to the point of kidnapping, which is obviously an extreme example, versus, a total uninvolvement, which I think is kind of a false ideal anyway. It's not, I think even whether we realize it or not, we're, just by the virtue of being together, we kind of involve ourselves at least to some extent in each other's lives. But I think maybe we could look at it as cultural in terms of for example, maybe in African, I know in African tribes, you don't say my name is Jake, you say my name is, and you start with your family name or your tribe name first. So for them, or a marriage, in many more traditional cultures, a marriage isn't so much between two people as it is two families. And to that extent, maybe it does differ a bit culturally. I don't know, just kind of throwing that out.
And the Italian father would have no question about what to do in that situation.
Right, yeah.
I think a fun ending to this story would be that someone has a rope and comes up behind the father and ties the father up, and there's an intervention with the father.
And gets him to believe that this Chinese guy really is the second coming of Jesus. Okay. All right, shall we pause and take our break?